Who really shapes America's future? Is it the president, Congress, the Supreme Court, the Federal Reserve? Or is it something even bigger? The institutions that outlast every election. Because over the last week, we've seen major developments in housing, artificial intelligence, manufacturing, Congress, and the future political leadership. Believe it or not, they're all connected. I'm Kyle Grimshaw, and this is the Texas Market Brief. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Kyle Grimshaw with the Grimshaw Home Group. Today is Tuesday, July 14th, 2026. Before we jump in, I do want to say something up front. I owe you an apology. We missed Friday's episode and we missed Monday's episode. Real estate has been keeping me very busy lately, which I'm very grateful for, but I also know several of you were looking forward to the next Texas Market Brief episodes. So I thank you for sticking with me. I really mean that. For now, this is still a side project for me and honestly a passion project. So I appreciate the patience and support. Now, let's make up for lost time because today's episode gets a bigger question than any one headline. Who really has the power? Let's jump on in. Let's start with a simple question. Why can a president only serve 8 years, but a member of Congress can serve 40 or even 50? The answer is actually pretty straightforward. The 22nd Amendment limits presidents to 2 elected terms. Congress has no comparable limit. That means senators and representatives can keep running for office as long as voters keep sending them back. Now, this debate has been around for a long time, and every few years it comes back with fresh energy. Supporters of congressional term limits say the system produces too many career politicians, too much insulation, and too little accountability. Opponents say the elections are already the term limits, and that experience matters when you're writing laws, negotiating budgets, and overseeing an enormous federal government. And here's the part a lot of people miss. This is not something Congress can fix with a normal law. If you want enforceable congressional term limits nationwide, you almost certainly need a constitutional amendment. The Supreme Court ruled in 1995 that individual states cannot add their own qualifications for federal congressional services beyond what's contained in the Constitution. So, one state cannot simply decide that its members of Congress are limited to a certain number of terms. A nationwide amendment would require approval from 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, followed by ratification of 3/4 of the states, or a constitutional convention called by the states, followed by the same 3/4 ratification requirement. Now, this is intentionally a high bar, and that's exactly why this conversation keeps resurfacing without actually becoming reality. The people being asked to surrender power are also part of the institution that would have to initiate the change. So whether you support term limits or not, it helps to understand the process. Because once you understand the process, you start understanding the institution. And that's really what today is about. Now let's talk housing, because this is the story every homeowner, buyer, seller, and investor should understand. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act has now become law, even without President Trump's signature. The president declined to sign or veto it within the constitutional window while Congress remained in session, allowing it to take effect without his signature. That matters because housing affordability has become one of the biggest pressure points in the country, and the broad goal of this law is clear: increase supply. The package is aimed at making it easier to build, finance, and approve more housing over time. That includes provisions related to construction barriers, manufactured housing, access to smaller mortgages, etc. Now, there's an important part. A housing law does not magically make homes affordable over the next month. That's not how housing works. Housing is slow, builders need capital, cities need infrastructure, developers need permits, contractors labor, and projects take time. So if this law succeeds, the effects will show up gradually, not overnight. It may increase the number of projects that have become financially possible. It may remove friction from the construction and financing process, and it may give individual buyers a little more room to compete against the largest investors. But it will not erase years of underbuilding with the stroke of a pen. And for Texas, that matters a lot, because in a high growth state, supply is still a long-term game. If you want affordability to improve sustainably, you have to make it easier to add homes where people actually need them. That is the bigger point. Now let's move to artificial intelligence, because AI is no longer just a software story, it's an infrastructure story. Every major AI platform needs data centers. Those data centers need electricity, they need land, they need water, fiber, and they need an enormous amount of capital. That's a big reason Texas is becoming one of the key states in the AI build-out. A Texas Tribune analysis identified at least 248 additional data centers planned across the state. ERCOT has also received large load interconnection requests totaling roughly 439 gigawatts, with about 89% of that tied to data centers. But that number needs context. Those are requests, not completed facilities, approved projects, or a forecast that every proposed development will actually be built. Projects may be delayed, some may be rejected, some may never even move forward, but the requests still reveal the extraordinary scale of demand that developers are proposing. For comparison, the all-time peak demand on the ERCOT grid has been a fraction of that amount. So this is not a small trend, it is a massive proposed economic build-out. But growth raises real questions. Who pays for the generation needed to serve it? Who pays for the transmission? How much water should these facilities consume? Should existing utility customers carry any of the infrastructure costs? And how much strain should local communities absorb in exchange for the promised jobs and the investment? Those are not anti-business questions. They are planning questions, because the next economy is not just digital, it's physical. And Texas is helping build the physical foundation underneath it. The opportunity is enormous. So is the responsibility. Now let's talk about another trend that doesn't get enough attention: reshoring. If you haven't heard that term before, it simply means companies bringing manufacturing and supply chains back to the United States after years of pushing production overseas. And this isn't happening for just one reason. COVID exposed supply chain fragility. Geopolitical tensions raised the cost of dependence. National security concerns changed how governments and businesses think about critical industries, and companies started asking a different question: what products need to be built closer to home? That shift is showing up in semiconductors, industrial equipment, defense, energy technology, and advanced manufacturing. This week, Bosch announced that it had begun sample production at its first American semiconductor factory, which is part of a much broader effort to expand domestic chip capacity. And Texas has been one of the major beneficiaries of this broader push, because when manufacturing comes in, it doesn't just create factory jobs. It creates demand for housing, roads, warehouses, restaurants, schools, skilled trades, power, water, utilities, and entire supporting communities. That's why this matters. Manufacturing isn't just an industrial story, it's a regional growth story. And if Texas continues attracting this investment, the housing and infrastructure surrounding those facilities will matter almost as much as the facilities themselves. This is one of the questions I hear all the time. Inventory is rising. Does that mean prices are about to collapse? No, not necessarily. And this is where definitions really matter. A seller's market means there are more buyers competing for homes than there are homes available. A buyer's market means available inventory exceeds current buyer demand. A balanced market sits somewhere in the middle. So when inventory starts increasing, what usually happens first? Buyers get more choices, homes take longer to sell, negotiation comes back into the conversation, sellers may offer concessions, and price growth may slow. This is very different from saying the market is crashing. A crash usually involves a much more severe combination of forced selling, distressed inventory, collapsing demand, tightening credit, rising unemployment, or broader financial instability. Simply having more homes available does not automatically create those conditions. A healthier supply picture is not the same thing as a collapse. And in many markets, including parts of Texas, what we're really seeing is a move toward better balance. And honestly, that's a much healthier outcome than the frenzy we saw a few years ago. That distinction matters because balance is not panic, balance is not collapse, and balance is not bad news. For buyers, it may mean more negotiating power. For sellers, it means pricing and presentation matter again. That is a functioning market, not necessarily a failing one. Finally, let's zoom out. A lot of the most powerful people in Washington are aging, stepping back, or entering their later chapters of their careers. And whether you follow politics closely or not, leadership transitions matter. They affect committee power, legislative priorities, relationships, negotiating style, institutional knowledge, and the way Congress actually functions behind the scenes. This week, the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Mitch McConnell's prolonged absence placed the issue of the Senate succession, health transparency, and institutional continuity directly in front of the country. Graham's passing was sudden and significant. It should not be treated like an ordinary retirement or routine political transition. At the same time, McConnell's continued rehabilitation and absence have generated questions about representation, public disclosure, and how the Senate handles extended vacancies or incapacitation among senior members. The question is not only who fills a seat, it's how quickly decades of influence, committee knowledge, procedural expertise, and political relationships can be transferred, or whether they can be transferred at all. Because a Senate seat is not simply one vote. Long-serving members can shape what legislation reaches the floor. They can influence committee decisions. They can hold relationships across factions and parties. And they often carry institutional knowledge that is difficult to replace immediately. New leaders bring different coalitions, different instincts, different priorities, and different approaches to power. That affects what Congress becomes over the next decade. Again, the personalities matter, but the institutions matter more. Here's what I've been thinking about. People spend a lot of time asking who wins elections. I think a better question is, what institutions survive the elections? Presidents come and go, governors, members of Congress eventually retire or leave office, markets rise and fall, but the institutions remain. Congress, the courts, the Federal Reserve, state governments, the financial system, the education system, those are the systems that shape everyday life. So the real question is not simply whether America is changing. The real question is whether our institutions can adapt quickly enough to the country America is becoming. Can Congress respond to technology moving faster than legislation? Can states build infrastructure quickly enough to support the growth? And can housing policy address shortages before affordability gets even worse? Another question, can political institutions transfer power responsibly when long-serving leaders suddenly leave? Because if those institutions cannot adapt, then the gap between innovation and governance is only going to get worse. And I think that is one of the defining challenges of the next decade. Power is not only about who holds office today, it's about whether the systems they control can still function and work tomorrow. I want to hear from you. Should members of Congress have term limits? And if so, how many years should they be allowed to serve? 6 years? 12 years? Maybe 18 years? Or should voters be allowed to re-elect someone indefinitely? I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. And if you found today's episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and share this episode with someone who enjoys understanding how policy, economics, technology, and real estate all connect. I'm Kyle Grimshaw with the Grimshaw Home Group. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Texas Market Brief. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you tomorrow.